I never thought that at 35, I'd be so nervous about a family dinner. But when your mother-in-law is Martha Johnson, a woman with a character stronger than granite and a gaze sharper than a knife, even a simple dinner turns into a trial. Mike, you didn't forget to buy the wine, did you? My wife Sarah's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. Of course, dear. 2 bottles of Cabernet as you asked, I replied, taking the bottles out of the refrigerator. Our apartment in the Chicago suburbs wasn't too big, but it was cozy. Sarah and I had been living here for 5 years, ever since we got married. Usually, we enjoyed quiet evenings together, but today we had to endure dinner with her parents. Sarah was bustling in the kitchen, checking the oven with a roast turkey. Her brown hair was gathered in a messy bun, and her face wore an expression of concentration. Are you sure we need to do this? I asked, hugging my wife from behind. Maybe we could say we suddenly had a pipe burst. Sarah laughed, but there was nervousness in her laughter. Mike, it's just dinner. We'll manage. I sighed. Sarah was right, but something inside me suggested that this evening would be special, and not in a good way. The doorbell sounded like a signal for the start of a battle. I opened the door, putting on my most welcoming smile. Good evening, Martha, George. I greeted my father-in-law and mother-in-law. Martha, a tall woman with perfect hair and makeup, gave me an appraising look. Michael, she nodded, walking past me into the apartment. George, a short man with kind eyes, shook my hand. How are you doing, son? He asked with genuine warmth in his voice. All good, George, thank you, I replied, feeling relief at his presence. Sarah came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Mom, Dad, I'm so glad to see you. Hugs, kisses, exchange of pleasantries, all of this resembled a well-rehearsed performance. We went to the living room, where I offered everyone drinks. So, Sarah, Martha began, settling into an armchair. How is your career progressing? Are you still working at the same company? I noticed how Sarah tensed up. Her career had always been a sore subject in conversations with her mother. Yes, Mom. I recently got a promotion. Oh, really? There was surprise in Martha's voice. And what do you do now? I became a marketing manager, Sarah replied proudly. Martha took a sip of wine. Well, the main thing is that work doesn't interfere with family life. By the way, have you thought about children yet? I almost choked on my drink. There was Martha's favorite topic. Mom, we've already talked about this. Sarah tried to remain calm. Mike and I aren't ready yet. Not ready? Martha raised an eyebrow. Dear, at your age I already. The turkey's ready, I interrupted, standing up. Shall we move to the table? George gratefully supported my initiative, and we moved to the dining room. Dinner proceeded in a tense atmosphere. Martha continued to ask uncomfortable questions. Sarah tried to maintain her composure, and George and I tried to diffuse the situation. Michael, Martha addressed me when we moved on to dessert. And how's your work? Still selling insurance? Yes, Martha. Things are going well. Well, she smirked. I hope you understand that Sarah needs stability. Maybe you should think about a more serious career? I felt Sarah squeeze my hand under the table. Mom, please. Suddenly, Sarah's phone rang, interrupting the brewing conflict. She apologized and went to another room. After a few minutes, she returned with a worried face. What happened, dear? I asked. It's Emily, my friend, Sarah replied. She's having some serious problems. She's asking me to come urgently. Now? Martha was surprised. In the middle of dinner? Mom, this is important. Emily would never ask if it wasn't absolutely necessary. I saw Sarah hesitating between her duty as a hostess and her desire to help her friend. Go, I said. I'll manage here. Sarah looked at me gratefully. I'm sorry, I really need to go. Mom, Dad, you understand, right? George nodded understandingly, and Martha pursed her lips but said nothing. Sarah quickly gathered her things and left, leaving me alone with her parents. I couldn't have imagined that this evening would be the beginning of the most difficult trial in my life. When the door closed behind Sarah, an awkward silence hung in the room. I looked at Martha and George, trying to think of what to say. More wine, I offered, feeling that this evening was going to be very, very long. After Sarah's departure, the atmosphere in the apartment changed. George, clearly feeling uncomfortable, suggested, "Maybe we should go too? We wouldn't want to impose on you, Mike." I was already ready to agree with relief, but Martha beat me to it. "Nonsense, George. We can't leave without finishing dinner. That would be impolite." She turned to me. "Isn't that right, Michael?" Her gaze left me no choice. "Of course, stay. Sarah will be upset if she finds out you left right after she departed." We returned to the table. I felt uncomfortable under Martha's intense gaze. "So, Michael," she began, "tell me more about your work. What are your plans for the future?" I took a sip of wine, trying to gather my thoughts. "Well, in the insurance business, there are always opportunities for growth. I'm thinking about—" "Opportunities?" Martha interrupted. "More specifically, Sarah deserves a man with ambition, you know." George coughed. "Dear, maybe we shouldn't." "Why not?" Martha objected. "I'm just concerned about our daughter's future." I felt myself starting to boil, but tried to stay calm. "I assure you, Martha, I'm doing everything possible to provide for our family." Of course. She waved her hand. "Just think about it, okay?" The next half hour passed in tense conversation. Martha continued to ask tricky questions, and I tried to answer diplomatically. George periodically tried to change the subject, but unsuccessfully. Finally, George stood up from the table. "I think I'll go get some fresh air." "Mike, you have a balcony, right?" "Yes, of course." I showed him the way with relief. When George went out, Martha suddenly changed. Her voice became softer, and a strange gleam appeared in her eyes. "Michael, dear, don't take my words too seriously. I'm just worried about you too." She stood up and approached me, placing her hand on my shoulder. I tensed at this unexpected touch. "You know," she continued, "you're a very attractive man. Sarah is so lucky to have you." I looked at her in surprise. "What's happening?" "Thank you, Martha. I also consider myself lucky to have met Sarah." "MMM," she purred. "Have you ever wondered who Sarah got her beauty from?" Her hand slid from my shoulder to my chest. I stepped back, feeling my heart start to race. "Martha, what are you?" "Oh, Michael, don't be so naive," she smiled playfully. "Haven't you ever noticed how I look at you?" I was in shock. My mother-in-law, a woman who had always treated me with barely concealed contempt, was now openly flirting with me. "Listen, I think you've had too much to drink." I tried to defuse the situation. "No, darling." Martha approached me again. "I'm absolutely sober. I just decided it's time to stop pretending." At that moment, I heard the balcony door opening. George was returning. Martha instantly stepped back and, as if nothing had happened, sat down at the table. "Ah, George, just in time. Michael was offering us coffee," she said, smiling at her husband. I stood there, stunned by what had happened. What was that? Why did Martha suddenly start behaving like this? And what should I do now? "Coffee?" I repeated, trying to gather my thoughts. "Yes, of course. I'll make it now." I hurried to the kitchen, feeling Martha's intense gaze on me. As I prepared the coffee, I tried to make sense of the situation. Maybe I just imagined it? Maybe it's some kind of misunderstanding? But deep inside, I understood this was only the beginning, and I was about to go through a real test of fidelity. The next few days passed in a strange fog. Sarah returned home late at night after that ill-fated dinner, tired and upset by her friend's problems. I didn't dare to tell her about her mother's strange behavior. It seemed too incredible, and I wasn't sure I had understood everything correctly. But fate, it seemed, decided to test me to the limit. On Thursday evening, when I returned from work, Sarah greeted me with news. "Mike, I need to go to a conference in Boston urgently. For 3 days." "What? So suddenly?" I was surprised. "Yes, one of the speakers got sick, and they asked me to replace him. It's a great opportunity for my career." She looked excited and happy at the same time. "Of course, go." I smiled, trying to hide my concern. When's the flight? Tomorrow morning. Oh, I completely forgot. Sarah slapped her forehead. Mom asked for help with renovations this weekend. Maybe you could go instead of me? I felt a chill run down my spine. Stay alone with Martha? After what happened? Maybe we should reschedule? I suggested uncertainly. Mike, please. Sarah looked at me pleadingly. You know how Mom will be upset if we cancel. Besides, it's a great chance for you to improve your relationship. If only you knew, I thought, but out loud I said, Okay, I'll go. The next morning, after seeing Sarah off to the airport, I headed to her parents' house. The whole way I convinced myself that that evening was just a misunderstanding, and Martha would behave as usual. George opened the door, smiling friendly. Mike, glad to see you. Come in, come in. Hi, George. How are you? I entered the house, looking around. Well, I'm going fishing with friends. Martha's in the living room. She'll explain what needs to be done. My heart skipped a beat. George is leaving. Fishing? For how long? I asked as casually as possible. For the whole weekend. I'll be back Sunday evening. He patted me on the shoulder. Thanks for agreeing to help. Martha is very happy. I smiled tensely, feeling panic starting to take over me. George left, and I, gathering all my resolve, headed to the living room. Martha was sitting in an armchair, leafing through a magazine. When I entered, she looked up and smiled that same smile that sent chills down my spine. Michael, dear, how glad I am to see you. She stood up and approached me. Thank you for agreeing to help. Hello, Martha. I tried to keep it formal. What needs to be done? Oh, nothing complicated. She waved her hand. We need to move some furniture around and hang new curtains. But first, coffee? I wanted to refuse, but Martha was already heading to the kitchen. I reluctantly followed her. While she was making coffee, I tried to keep my distance, but the small kitchen didn't leave much room for maneuvering. Martha seemed to be deliberately moving in a way to brush against me every now and then. You know, Michael, she said, handing me a cup. I often think about that evening. What evening? I pretended not to understand. Don't pretend, she smirked. You know perfectly well what I'm talking about. There's something between us, you can't deny it. I put the cup on the table, feeling my hands start to shake. Martha, listen, I think you misunderstood everything. I love Sarah and… Love? She laughed. Michael, you're so naive. This isn't about love, it's about passion, about desire. She came closer, and I smelled her perfume again. A sweet, heavy aroma, quite unlike the light floral scent Sarah used. I saw how you look at me, Martha whispered, her hand sliding across my chest. You want me, admit it. I stepped back, my back against the kitchen cabinet. Martha pressed her body against mine. Martha, please stop. My voice sounded hoarse. This is wrong. And what's right? She ran her finger along my cheek. Living by the rules? Denying yourself pleasure? Michael, life is too short for doubts. Her lips were a millimeter from mine. I could feel her breath, see every wrinkle around her eyes. For a moment, a crazy thought flashed, what if? But Sarah's image flashed before my eyes, and I sharply pushed Martha away. No, I said firmly. I won't do this. I love your daughter, and I will never betray her. Martha stepped back, her face contorted with anger and disappointment. You'll regret this, Michael, she hissed. You don't know what you're giving up. I ran out of the kitchen, grabbed my jacket, and rushed out of the house. My heart was pounding, my head was buzzing. What have I done? How can I look Sarah in the eye now? And what is Martha planning? Sitting in the car, I couldn't start the engine for a long time. My hands were shaking. One thing I knew for sure, this day had changed everything, and there was no going back. I spent a sleepless night tossing and turning in the empty bed. Sarah's absence was felt especially acutely after what had happened. Thoughts were spinning in my head, like a hamster in a wheel. How could I let such a situation happen? Why didn't I tell Sarah about her mother's strange behavior right after that dinner? And what should I do now? I got out of bed around 3 in the morning, unable to lie down any longer. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a whiskey. The alcohol burned my throat but brought no relief. The phone rang. Sarah. "Hi, honey." Her voice sounded cheerful and happy. "Sorry for calling so late, just got free. How are you? How's Mom?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Everything's fine," I forced out. "How's the conference?" "Oh, it's amazing." Sarah began to talk about her presentation, new acquaintances, interesting ideas. I listened half-heartedly, feeling guilt eating me up inside. My wife is sharing her successes, and what am I doing? "Mike? Are you listening to me?" Sarah's voice brought me back to reality. "Yes, of course, dear. I'm just tired. Had a lot of work today." "I understand. Rest, love. I'll call tomorrow." "Love you." "Love you too," I replied, feeling these words stuck in my throat. Hanging up, I stared into the darkness outside the window. What's happening to me? Did I really feel something for Martha in that moment in the kitchen? No, it's impossible. I love Sarah. We've been together for so many years. We've been through a lot. Martha, it's just a delusion, a moment of weakness. But why then do I feel so guilty? After all, I didn't give in to temptation, I pushed her away. Then why can't I shake off the feeling that I betrayed Sarah? Morning found me on the couch in the living room. I didn't remember falling asleep. My head was splitting, my mouth was dry. Looking at the clock, I realized I had overslept. Late for work. Damn! Hastily taking a shower and getting dressed, I rushed out of the house. The day at work passed in a fog. I couldn't concentrate, constantly catching myself thinking about Martha, about her touches, about the scent of her perfume. "Hey, Mike, are you okay?" my colleague Jim asked at lunch. "You look awful." "Yeah, everything's fine," I lied. "Just didn't get enough sleep." In the evening, returning home, I poured myself another whiskey. The alcohol dulled the feeling of guilt but couldn't silence the thoughts. I remembered how I met Sarah. A university party, she laughed at my stupid jokes. Our first date in a cheap pizzeria because we were both broke. The proposal I made to her on the shore of Lake Michigan. And then the image of Martha popped up in my head. Her confident movements, commanding gaze, the feeling of her body pressed against mine. I hated myself for these thoughts. How could I even for a second think about another woman? About my wife's mother? The phone rang again. Martha's number. I stared at the screen, not knowing what to do. After the fifth ring, I decided to answer. "Hello?" My voice trembled. "Michael, dear." Martha's voice sounded deceptively soft. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday. Let's meet and talk?" I swallowed. "Martha, I don't think that's a good idea." "Michael," her tone became harder. "We need to discuss what happened. Or do you want me to tell Sarah myself about how you jumped on me?" I caught my breath. She wouldn't dare. I'll think about it," I forced out and hung up. My heart was pounding like crazy. What should I do? Tell Sarah the truth? But would she believe me? Or meet with Martha and try to sort everything out? I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice. One wrong step in my life, my marriage, everything would go to hell. Gulping down the whiskey, I made a decision. Tomorrow I'll meet with Martha. But not to succumb to her charms. But to put an end to this madness once and for all. Only will I be able to resist temptation? And what price will I have to pay for my fidelity? Saturday morning greeted me with a headache and heaviness in my chest. I slowly got out of bed, feeling every muscle protesting against movement. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. A gaunt face, red eyes, stubble. The phone vibrated, a message from Sarah. "Good morning, love. Today is the last day of the conference. Can't wait to get back home. Love you." A feeling of guilt overwhelmed me with renewed force. I didn't reply. I couldn't make myself right. "I love you," when I was about to meet her mother. At 11 o'clock, I parked near a small cafe on the outskirts of town. Martha had insisted on meeting here, so that no one would disturb us. Taking a deep breath, I went inside. Martha was already waiting for me at a corner table. She looked impeccable, an elegant dress, perfect makeup. Nothing in her appearance betrayed a woman who had tried to seduce her son-in-law 2 days ago. "Michael, dear," she smiled when I sat opposite her. "I'm so glad you came." "Let's get straight to the point, Martha," I replied dryly. "Why did you call me here?" Her smile widened. "Oh, Michael, always so serious." "Relax, have some coffee." I pushed away the offered cup. "What do you want?" Martha sighed, her face becoming serious. "All right, if you insist. I want you to admit that there's something between us." I shook my head. "You're mistaken. I love Sarah and—" Love," she interrupted. "You're like a broken record. This isn't about love, Michael. It's about passion, about desire. I saw how you looked at me then in the kitchen. It was a moment of madness," I said firmly. "Nothing more." Martha leaned closer, her perfume enveloping me again. "What if I tell Sarah that you threw yourself at me? That you tried to kiss me?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "You wouldn't dare." "That's a lie." "Is it?" she smirked. "And who will Sarah believe, her mother or her husband, who didn't even tell her about this incident?" I was silent, feeling cornered. "What do you want?" I finally asked. Martha leaned back in her chair, satisfied with the effect she produced. "Nothing special. Just admit that you want me. That you've been thinking about me all these days." I clenched my fists under the table. Part of me wanted to stand up and leave, to tell everything to hell. But another part knew she was right. I had been thinking about her, and it was driving me crazy. I began, but stopped short. At that moment, my phone rang. "Sarah." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you going to answer?" I hesitated for a second, then picked up. "Hello, dear." "Mike." Sarah's voice sounded excited. "You won't believe what happened." "What?" I asked, looking directly at Martha. "I got promoted. Right here, at the conference. I'm now the marketing director." I felt a lump in my throat. Sarah had achieved what she dreamed of, and That's wonderful, honey. Congratulations." "Thank you." "Oh, I need to run to the closing session." "Love you." "Love you too," I replied, feeling these words burn my tongue. Hanging up, I saw Martha looking at me curiously. "Good news?" I nodded, unable to speak. "You know, Michael," said Martha, standing up, "I'll give you time to think. But remember, the clock is ticking. Sarah returns tomorrow, and I need your answer before that." She leaned in and lightly kissed me on the cheek. "See you soon, dear son-in-law." I remained sitting, stunned and confused. What have I done? How could I let everything go so far? Leaving the cafe, I wandered the streets for a long time, trying to put my thoughts in order. Sarah had achieved her dream. She deserves a husband she can be proud of, not one who cheats on her with her own mother. But how do I get out of this situation? Tell Sarah the truth? Or give in to Martha's blackmail? In the evening, sitting in a dark apartment with a bottle of whiskey, I realized I was at a crossroads. And the choice I make tomorrow will determine the rest of my life. Sunday morning greeted me with a headache and nausea, the consequences of a night spent in the company of a whiskey bottle. I struggled to get up from the couch where I had spent the night, unable to make myself lie in Sarah's and my bed. Looking at the clock, I realized I had only a few hours left until Sarah's return. A few hours to make a decision that would change my entire life. After taking a shower and drinking strong coffee, I felt a bit better physically, but morally I was still shattered. My thoughts were jumbled. I couldn't focus on anything. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. I flinched. Could Sarah have returned early? But when I opened the door, I saw Martha. "Good morning, Michael." She smiled, walking past me into the apartment. "I hope I'm not too early." I silently closed the door, feeling my heart start to race. "What are you doing here, Martha?" Martha sighed, her face becoming serious. "Oh, I just thought we should talk before Sarah returns." She looked around. "You look terrible, dear." "Rough night?" I ignored her question. We have nothing to talk about. I'm not going to participate in your game. Martha laughed. Game? Oh, Michael, this isn't a game. This is life. And you have to decide what it will be like. She came closer, and I smelled her perfume again. Think about it, she whispered. We could be together. You and me. No obligations, no boredom of family life. Just passion and pleasure. I stepped back, feeling anger overwhelming me. And what about Sarah? Your daughter? Are you ready to ruin her life for, what? A fleeting affair? Martha's face contorted. Don't you dare talk to me about Sarah, she hissed. You think I don't love my daughter? But she's always been perfect. Always achieved everything she wanted. And what did I get? A boring life with a man who doesn't even notice me. I was shocked by her frankness. Martha, listen. No, you listen, she interrupted. I deserve happiness. I deserve passion. And I know you feel the same. I saw it in your eyes. I was silent, not knowing what to say. Part of me understood her, sympathized with her. But another part. I can't, I finally said. I love Sarah. And I won't betray her. Martha looked at me for several seconds, then her face twisted with rage. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. Then I'll tell her everything. About how you tried to seduce me. How you touched me. How? Enough. I raised my voice. I'll tell her the truth. The whole truth. About how you tried to seduce me. About your blackmail. About everything. Martha turned pale. You wouldn't dare. I would, I said firmly. I love Sarah, and I won't let you destroy our marriage. At that moment, we heard the sound of the door opening. We both froze. Mike? Sarah's voice. I'm home. Sarah entered the room and stopped, seeing us. Mom? What are you doing here? I looked at Martha, then at Sarah. The moment of truth had come. Sarah, I began, feeling my voice tremble. We need to talk. All three of us. Sarah looked from me to her mother in confusion. What's going on? I took a deep breath. Sit down, please. It's a long story. And I began to tell her. About everything. The room plunged into heavy silence after I finished my story. Sarah sat on the couch, her face pale, her hands trembling. Martha stood by the window, turned away from us. I felt drained but strangely relieved. I can't believe this, Sarah finally said, her voice shaking. Mom, is this true? Martha slowly turned to us. Her face was a mask of pain and shame. Sarah, sweetie. She faltered, then fell to her knees before her daughter. Forgive me. I don't know what came over me. I just felt so lonely, so unwanted. Sarah recoiled from her mother, her eyes filling with tears. How could you? She whispered. You're my mother. He's my husband. How could you do this to us? I stood there, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to comfort Sarah, but I wasn't sure I had the right. Sarah, I began. I should have told you right away. I didn't know how. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. Sarah looked at me, and I saw pain and disappointment in her eyes. And should I believe you now, Mike? She asked quietly. You hid this from me. You met with my mother behind my back. I know. I lowered my head. I made a mistake. But I love you, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt you. Martha suddenly stood up. Sarah, Michael isn't to blame. It's me. I'm the one at fault. I tried to seduce him. I blackmailed him. He loves you. He rejected me despite all my attempts. Sarah looked at her mother, then at me. Her eyes held a mix of emotions, pain, distrust, but also a glimmer of hope. I need time, she finally said. I can't think about this now. She stood up and headed for the door. Sarah, wait. I took a step towards her. No, Mike. She shook her head. I need to be alone. Please. With these words, she left the apartment. I stood there, feeling the world around me crumbling. Martha quietly approached me. Michael, I don't know what to say. I've ruined everything. I looked at her. The woman who just yesterday seemed to me the embodiment of temptation now looked simply tired and broken. Why, Martha? I asked. Why did you do this? She sighed. I don't know. Maybe envy of Sarah's youth. Maybe the desire to feel wanted again. Maybe just stupidity. But it's no excuse. I'm a terrible mother and a terrible person. I shook my head. You made a mistake. We all make mistakes. But that's not what's important now. What's important is how we fix the situation. Martha looked at me in surprise. You don't hate me? No, I answered honestly. I'm angry at you. I'm disappointed. But I don't hate you. You're Sarah's mother. And I know that deep down inside, you love her. Martha nodded, tears flowing down her face. I do love her. More than anything in the world. And I'll do anything to fix this. We sat in silence for several hours, waiting for Sarah's return. When she finally came back, her eyes were red from crying, but there was determination in them. I've been thinking, she said, looking at both of us, and I've decided that I won't let this destroy our family. She turned to her mother. Mom, what you did, it's terrible. It will take me time to forgive you. But you're my mother and I love you. I want you to get help. See a therapist. To figure yourself out. Martha nodded, tears flowing down her face again. Yes, of course. I'll do anything. Then Sarah looked at me. Mike, I love you. And I believe that you didn't betray me. But you should have told me right away. We need to work on our trust. On our honesty with each other. I nodded, feeling my heart fill with hope. I'll do everything to earn your trust again, Sarah. I love you more than anything in the world. Sarah took a deep breath. It won't be easy. We all have a lot of work to do. But we're family. And we'll get through this together. I looked at Sarah, at Martha, and for the first time in days, I felt that everything could work out. Yes, we have a long road ahead. Yes, there will be difficulties and doubts. But love, honesty, and forgiveness can overcome a lot. This test of fidelity showed me how fragile relationships can be, but also how strong they can become if we're willing to fight for them. A new beginning awaited us ahead. And I was ready to do everything to make it the beginning of the best chapter in our lives. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.